Hello and welcome to the Very Audible Stories. In today's videos, it would be a stories about a hidden kindness coming from a mafia bosses whom everyone feared. If you like these videos, please share your thoughts on the comment sections and subscribe to the channel to receive notifications about new videos. Thank you.
Billionaire Christian Russo ran Chicago's underworld from a glass corner office. At the Onyx Room, a single spilled drop of wine meant the end of a career or worse. 3 seasoned servers had already fled his table in tears. Then came Amelia, carrying a tray, a secret, and zero fear. The atmosphere inside the Onyx Room was always carefully curated to exude quiet, intimidating wealth, but tonight the air was thick enough to choke on. Located discreetly in the basement of a historic loop skyscraper, the private dining club catered exclusively to politicians, hedge fund managers, and men who operated in the gray spaces between high finance and organized crime. Tonight, the club's most terrifying patron was hosting a dinner in the private mahogany-paneled dining suite known as the Vault. Christian Russo was the CEO of Russo Global Logistics, a sprawling shipping empire that dominated the Midwest. To the readers of Forbes and the Wall Street Journal, he was a ruthless, 34-year-old visionary who specialized in aggressive corporate takeovers. To the federal prosecutors at the Dirksen Federal Building, he was the untouchable head of a sophisticated syndicate that controlled the city's ports, unions, and illegal import pipelines. Christian did not tolerate incompetence, delay, or mistakes. He operated with a cold, calculating precision that left no room for human error. Standing outside the heavy double doors of the vault, Simon, the club's veteran maitre d', was sweating profusely into the collar of his tailored tuxedo. "What do you mean she's refusing to go back in?" Simon hissed, grabbing the arm of a pale, trembling waitress named Sarah. "I can't, Simon. I absolutely can't," Sarah whispered, her eyes brimming with tears. She was holding a silver tray with a half-empty bottle of 1982 Chateau Margaux. Her hands were shaking so violently that the bottle clattered against the metal. He didn't even yell. I was pouring the wine, and the bottleneck grazed the rim of his glass. He just stopped talking, looked up at me with those dead, dark eyes, and said, "If you lack the motor skills to pour a liquid, I suggest you find employment that doesn't require hands. Get out." Simon, his bodyguard, shifted his jacket. "I saw the gun. I'm not going back." Simon dragged a hand down his face. This was a disaster. Christian Russo was sitting across the table from Declan O'Connor, the notoriously volatile head of a rival Irish faction from Boston. The dinner was a delicate peace negotiation over a disputed freight route. Millions of dollars and potentially dozens of lives hung on the mood in that room. "Fine. Go to the kitchen," Simon snapped. He turned to a senior server, a woman named Chloe, who had 10 years of fine dining experience. "Chloe, you take the appetizers in. Just be invisible. Do not speak unless spoken to." Chloe nodded, her face grim. She took the tray of seared Wagyu crostini and slipped into the room. Less than 3 minutes later, the heavy doors swung open again. Chloe marched out, her face flushed red with humiliation and fury. "Done," she said, practically throwing the empty tray onto a side station. "O'Connor's men are making crude comments, and Russo told me my perfume was an aggressive assault on the culinary integrity of the room and ordered me to wash it off or leave. I'm leaving. Fire me if you want, Simon." Panic gripped Simon's chest. The VIP room was now without a dedicated server, and the main courses were due in 10 minutes. If the service fell apart, Russo would hold the club responsible. Simon spun around, scanning the dimly lit service hallway, his eyes landing on a young woman diligently polishing silverware near the espresso machine. Amelia Hayes was 23, wearing a standard black vest and tie, her dark hair pulled back into a tight, practical bun. She wasn't a career server. She was a full-time nursing student at Cook County General, working double shifts at the Onyx Room to keep her family afloat. Life had long ago stripped Amelia of the luxury of being easily intimidated. She grew up in Oak Park with a father, Thomas, whose crippling gambling addiction had introduced her to the darkest elements of Chicago's underbelly by the time she was 12. She had negotiated with loan sharks on her front porch while her father hid in the bathroom. A billionaire CEO with a god complex was, to her, just another man who thought his money gave him the right to be a tyrant. "Amelia," Simon practically jogged over to her. "I need a massive favor." Amelia didn't stop polishing the silver fork in her hand. "I'm cut in 20 minutes, Simon. I have a pharmacology exam at 8 in the morning. I will pay you double your shift rate out of my own pocket, and I'll give you the entirety of the gratuity from the vault. It's an open checkbook. The tip alone will be over $2,000. Amelia paused. $2,000. The number echoed in her mind. Her father had recently relapsed, taking out a fresh, devastating loan from a shadow lender to bet on offshore boxing matches. The first interest payment was due in 48 hours, and the men collecting it were known to break fingers as a first warning. $2,000 would cover the payment and buy her a month to figure out a real solution. She set the fork down and turned to Simon, her expression calm and unreadable. "Who is in the room?" "Christian Russo," Simon said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "And Declan O'Connor." "It's a bad room, Amelia. They've already chewed through Sarah and Chloe. Just pour the wine, serve the food from the left, clear from the right, and do not react to anything they say." Amelia picked up a fresh serving cloth and draped it over her forearm. "I need the main courses fired right now. If they're drinking without eating, the Irish guys will get louder, and Russo will get annoyed by the noise. Tell the chef I'm walking in 3 minutes." Simon stared at her, slightly taken aback by her clinical assessment of the situation. "Yes, right away." Amelia walked toward the heavy mahogany doors of the vault. She didn't pray, and she didn't take a deep breath to steady her nerves. She just pushed the doors open and stepped into the lion's den. The vault was thick with the smell of expensive leather, roasted garlic, and the heavy tension of men who hated each other, pretending to be civilized. Christian Russo sat at the head of the long table. He was devastatingly handsome, but in a severe, architectural way, sharp jawline, immaculate dark hair, and eyes that were the exact color of polished obsidian. He wore a custom charcoal suit that cost more than Amelia's college tuition. He radiated a terrifying, coiled energy, like a predator deciding whether to strike or just watch its prey bleed out. Across from him sat Declan O'Connor, a broad-shouldered, red-faced man who was already halfway through a bottle of bourbon. 2 massive bodyguards stood in the corners of the room, their eyes tracking Amelia the second she entered. Amelia approached the table silently. She didn't look at the floor in submission, nor did she stare aggressively. She kept her gaze at collar level, a trick she learned working in the ER triage with belligerent patients. It showed attention without inviting a challenge. She moved with absolute precision, placing the plates of herb-crusted lamb and truffled risotto before the men. She reached for the bottle of Margaux to refill Christian's glass. "I told the last girl," Christian's voice cut through the silence, deep, smooth, and laced with absolute authority, that if she lacked a steady hand, she had no business near a $5,000 vintage. Amelia didn't freeze. She continued the pour, her hand as steady as a surgeon's. The dark red liquid stopped exactly at the widest part of the glass, the perfect pour. She twisted the bottle slightly to catch the drip, keeping the label facing him. "The last girl was intimidated by the company, Mr. Russo," Amelia said, her voice clear and perfectly even. "I am simply here to ensure your dinner meets the standards of the club. Your wine—" Christian's dark eyes snapped up to her face. For a fraction of a second, genuine surprise flickered behind his cold exterior. People did not speak back to him. They certainly didn't do it with such unflinching calm. Declan O'Connor let out a loud, grating laugh. "Look at this one! Got a bit of a spine on her. Better than the crying one." Declan reached out suddenly, his large, calloused hand wrapping tightly around Amelia's wrist as she reached to clear an empty bread plate near him. "You know, sweetheart, the service in Boston is a lot more accommodating." The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Christian's jaw tightened. One of Declan's bodyguards chuckled. Amelia looked down at Declan's hand on her wrist. Her pulse didn't spike. She didn't try to frantically pull away, which would have only amused him. Instead, she leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to a low, conversational tone meant only for the table. "Mr. O'Connor," Amelia said, her tone devoid of fear or anger, sounding almost academic, "you're gripping my radiocarpal joint. If you squeeze any tighter, you'll compress the median nerve. Given the prominent spider angiomas on your cheeks and the slight yellowing of your sclera, your liver is already struggling to process the alcohol you're consuming. If my hand spasms and I drop this plate, the noise will startle your security, Mr. Russo's security will react, and your elevated blood pressure might just induce a stroke before anyone draws a weapon. I suggest you release my wrist so I can fetch your dessert." Silence slammed into the room like a physical weight. Declan stared at her, his face cycling through shock, confusion, and finally a deep, flushed embarrassment. Slowly, his fingers uncurled from her wrist. Amelia calmly picked up the bread plate, gave a polite nod, and stepped back. Christian Russo was staring at her. The icy indifference was entirely gone, replaced by a sharp, predatory fascination. He had watched seasoned mafia bosses crumble under Declan's erratic intimidation tactics. This waitress in a cheap uniform with a messy bun had just diagnosed a mob boss with early-stage liver failure and threatened him with a shootout, all without raising her voice. "What is your name?" Christian asked. The command in his tone was absolute. Amelia turned to face him. "Amelia, sir." "Amelia," Christian tasted the name, his eyes raking over her face, memorizing her features. "You are studying medicine. Nursing, sir. You are wasting your time serving food." "I am funding my education, Mr. Russo," Amelia replied smoothly. "Will there be anything else for the table?" "No," Christian said, not breaking eye contact, "but you will be my personal server for the remainder of the evening. No one else enters this room. Understood?" "Understood." For the next hour, Amelia served them flawlessly. The dynamic in the room had shifted. Declan was unusually quiet, drinking water instead of bourbon, thoroughly unnerved by Amelia's medical read on him. Christian, meanwhile, conducted his business negotiations with ruthless efficiency, forcing Declan into a corner and securing the freight routes he wanted. But Christian's eyes rarely left Amelia. He watched how she moved, how she anticipated needs without being asked, how entirely unimpressed she was by the power and wealth radiating around her. When the dinner finally concluded, Declan and his men left first, looking defeated. Christian remained at the table, casually signing the exorbitant bill. Amelia approached to collect the leather folio. "Simon mentioned you were finishing your shift," Christian said, not looking up as he wrote. "I assume the tip I am leaving will be sufficient to ensure your presence the next time I dine here." "I work Tuesdays and Thursdays, sir," Amelia said politely. Christian closed the folio and pushed it toward her. He stood up, towering over her, his physical presence overwhelming. "I don't adapt my schedule to waitresses, Amelia. You will work when I am here." Before she could form a professional refusal, Christian turned and walked out of the room, his bodyguard trailing silently behind him. Amelia let out a long, quiet breath. Her legs felt suddenly weak now that the adrenaline was fading. She reached for the leather folio, opening it to retrieve the signed receipt. She stared at the paper. The tip was $5,000, more than double what Simon had promised. It was life-changing money for her current situation. But as her eyes drifted from the number to the corporate credit card receipt, the blood drained entirely from her face. The card was drawn from a private corporate account. At the top of the receipt, printed in bold black ink, was the parent company name, Apex Financial Holdings. Amelia's heart hammered against her ribs. Apex Financial. It was the exact name on the threatening letters her father received. It was the shell company, run by the butcher, the ruthless debt collector threatening to destroy her family. The man she had just served, the billionaire who had just demanded her exclusive service, wasn't just a difficult customer. He owned the debt that was ruining her life. And now, she had his complete, undivided attention. The morning after her shift at the Onyx Room, Amelia bypassed her pharmacology study group at Rush University Medical Center. Instead, she took the L train back to Oak Park, her stomach twisting into painful knots. The $5,000 receipt felt like a cinder block in her pocket. When she unlocked the door to her childhood home, the scent of stale beer and desperation hit her immediately. The living room was a disaster. Cushions were torn from the sofa, drawers were violently yanked from the console table, and her father, Thomas Hayes, was sitting on the linoleum kitchen floor, nursing a split lip and a rapidly swelling eye. "Dad!" Amelia breathed, dropping her bag. She rushed over, her clinical training kicking in as she tilted his chin to examine the laceration. "Who did this? The collectors?" Thomas refused to meet her eyes. His hands, stained with nicotine and trembling from withdrawal, pulled away from her grasp. "I needed a sure thing, Mia." The fight in Vegas, the kid was supposed to take a dive in the 4th round. He didn't. I had to double down to cover the spread. Double down? Amelia's voice was dangerously quiet. "Dad, the interest payment was $2,000. I have it. I have the money. We can make the payment today." Thomas let out a ragged, pathetic sob. "It's not $2,000 anymore, Amelia. I didn't borrow from the street bookies this time. I went to the top. I went to Apex." Amelia's blood ran cold. She remembered the bold black letters on Christian Russo's receipt. "Apex Financial Holdings. How much, Dad?" she demanded, grabbing his shoulders. "Tell me the exact number." $250,000, he whispered, burying his face in his hands. "They want the deed to the house by Friday, or they said they're going to start selling off my organs on the black market." "They aren't kidding, Mia. The guy who came here, Dominic, he had dead eyes." Amelia stood up slowly, the world tilting on its axis. $250,000. It was an insurmountable sum. Her father hadn't just made a mistake, he had signed their death warrants. But as the panic threatened to swallow her, the image of Christian Russo's obsidian eyes flashed in her mind. He was the CEO of Apex. He owned this debt, and he had just demanded her exclusive service. "Pack a bag," Amelia ordered, her voice devoid of emotion. "You are going to Aunt Carol's in Wisconsin. Right now. Do not use your credit cards. Do not turn on your phone. You take the Greyhound under a fake name." "What are you going to do?" Thomas asked, looking terrified of his own daughter. "I'm going to go to work," she replied. 48 hours later, Amelia stood in the opulent foyer of Apex Financial Holdings, located on the top floor of a sleek glass high-rise on LaSalle Street. The corporate veneer was flawless abstract art, minimalist furniture, and receptionists with Ivy League degrees. But beneath the surface, it was a fortress of predatory lending and money laundering. Amelia bypassed the receptionist and walked directly toward the heavy mahogany doors that mirrored the ones at the Onyx Room. A massive security guard stepped in her path. "Appointment?" The guard grunted. "Tell Christian Russo that his Thursday waitress is here," Amelia said, staring straight through the man. The guard scoffed, reaching for her arm. "Listen, sweetheart, you can't just let her in." The voice came from behind them. The mahogany doors had opened. Standing there, flanked by a brutally scarred man, whom Amelia assumed was Dominic, was Christian. He was dressed in a tailored navy suit, looking every inch the legitimate billionaire, but the dark amusement in his eyes belonged entirely to the underworld. "Mr. Russo," Amelia said, stepping past the guard, "we need to talk about my father's portfolio." Christian's lips twitched in a faint smile. He gestured for her to enter his office, a sprawling corner suite with panoramic views of Lake Michigan. He waved Dominic out, leaving them completely alone. "I must admit, Amelia, I ran a background check on you the moment I left the club," Christian said, walking over to a crystal decanter and pouring 2 glasses of sparkling water. He handed her one. "Imagine my surprise when I discovered that the brilliant, unflappable nursing student who diagnosed Declan O'Connor was the daughter of my most pathetic, chronic debtor." Amelia didn't take a sip. She set the glass on his desk. $250,000 is a rounding error for Russo Global Logistics. To my family, it's a death sentence. I want to negotiate my father's debt. Christian leaned against the edge of his massive desk, crossing his arms. "Negotiate? With what leverage? Amelia, you make $22 an hour at the hospital and live in a mortgaged house in Oak Park. You have nothing I want. Except, perhaps, your undivided attention at dinner. You want my medical expertise, Amelia countered, her mind racing. You demanded my service because I didn't flinch. You operate in a violent world, Mr. Russo. People get hurt, and you can't always take them to Northwestern Memorial without answering federal questions. I am top of my clinical cohort. I know pharmacology, trauma triage, and wound care. I will be your private, off-the-books medical retainer. Call me anytime, day or night. In exchange, you freeze my father's debt and waive the interest. Christian stared at her, the silence stretching so tight it felt like a piano wire snapping. He slowly pushed off the desk, walking toward her until he was mere inches away. The scent of bergamot and danger radiated from him. You are offering to bind yourself to the Mafia to save a degenerate gambler, Christian said softly, his gaze dropping to her lips before meeting her eyes again. Do you understand what happens to people who enter my world and learn my secrets? I understand that I am out of options, Amelia replied, her chin held high. Christian reached out, his knuckles lightly grazing her cheek. The touch was terrifyingly gentle. I don't need a trauma nurse for my soldiers, Amelia. They know the risks. But I do have a situation that requires a delicate, highly skilled touch. He turned and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the city. My younger sister, Isabella. 3 weeks ago, a rival syndicate attempted a hit on my motorcade on Lakeshore Drive. Isabella was in the car. She took a bullet to the lower abdomen. We have a private surgeon who saved her life, but the post-operative care is complex. She developed a severe secondary infection, and she trusts no one. She refuses to let my men near her, and I cannot risk bringing in a commercial nurse who might talk to the feds. Christian turned back to face her, his expression hardening into pure, unyielding command. You will move into my estate in Lake Forest. You will provide round-the-clock care for Isabella until she is fully recovered. If she heals, your father's debt is erased completely. If she deteriorates because of your incompetence, Dominic will pay Thomas a final visit. Amelia's heart hammered, but her voice remained dead calm. I need full access to a sterilized medical suite, a blank check for pharmaceutical supplies from a discreet supplier, and absolute authority over her diet and visitors, including you. Christian's eyes flared with a mix of shock and intense, undeniable respect. You have a deal, Amelia. The Russo estate in Lake Forest was a heavily fortified castle. For 3 weeks, Amelia lived in this gilded cage, operating out of an off-the-grid medical wing. Isabella Russo was a fiercely intelligent, bitter 20-year-old who initially fought every IV change, but Amelia's unwavering patience eventually won her over. Soon, Isabella's infection stabilized and color returned to her cheeks. During those weeks, an electric dynamic developed between Amelia and Christian. They shared late-night coffees in the silent kitchen. Christian, who trusted no one, found himself opening up to the blunt nursing student about the crushing weight of his empire. Amelia found an anchor in his terrifying stability. Beneath the ruthless exterior, she saw a man fiercely protective of those he loved. But in the underworld, peace is just a delayed war. The twist came on a torrential Tuesday night. Amelia was in the library when Christian walked in, his suit soaked, knuckles bloody, and eyes burning with a lethal fury. "Where is your father?" he demanded. Amelia dropped her medical journal. "He's in Wisconsin." What happened? Declan O'Connor's men intercepted 2 inbound shipments at O'Hare. Christian stepped closer, his presence suffocating. They knew classified logistics data. My cybersecurity team discovered the leak came from an external IP address registered to Thomas Hayes. Amelia felt the floor drop. No, my dad is a gambler, not a hacker. But he knows people who are. Christian sneered, gripping her arms. He sold my routes to the Irish for a quick payout. He betrayed me, Amelia. Your father is the leak. Before Amelia could process the betrayal, the massive bay windows shattered inward in a hail of automatic gunfire. "Get down!" Christian roared, tackling her to the rug as glass rained over them. Alarms shrieked. Declan O'Connor had used the diverted resources to launch a direct assault on the estate, while Christian's security was scrambled at O'Hare. "Isabella!" Amelia screamed over the gunfire. Christian drew his Glock, a mask of pure violence. "Stay behind me." They crawled through the ruined library. In the hallway, Dominic rushed toward them, rifle raised. "Boss, they breached the south gate. We're pinned." "Hold the stairs," Christian commanded. He looked at Amelia. "Go to the safe room. Lock it." "I'm not leaving, Isabella," Amelia snapped, crawling past him toward the east wing. She found Isabella terrified but unharmed. Amelia quickly disconnected the IV, helped the girl into a wheelchair, and pushed her toward the panic room. Suddenly, a massive figure stepped from the shadows. It was Declan's bodyguard from the restaurant. He raised his weapon with a cruel smile. Well, if it isn't the mouthy Waitress. Operating on pure adrenaline, Amelia grabbed a heavy metal oxygen tank from the wheelchair and hurled it at the man's legs. As he stumbled, a deafening gunshot echoed. The bodyguard dropped dead, a bullet hole in his forehead. Christian stepped over the body, his gun smoking. He looked at Amelia, his dark eyes wide with absolute awe. She hadn't screamed, she had fought. "Get in the room," he ordered softly. For 4 hours, the estate was a war zone. Amelia sat in the silent safe room with Isabella, listening to the muffled destruction. When the steel door finally hissed open at dawn, Christian stood in the doorway. Covered in plaster dust and his left arm bleeding heavily from a graze, he looked exhausted, brutal, and victorious. "It's over," Christian said. "O'Connor is dead." Amelia grabbed her medical kit, wordlessly pulling off his jacket to clean the gunshot wound. As she applied antiseptic, Christian looked down at her. "My men tracked down your father," he said quietly. Amelia's hands froze. She knew the rules. Betrayal meant death. "Christian, please. He's an addict. He didn't understand." Christian cupped her face with his uninjured hand, brushing soot from her cheek. "Under normal circumstances, Thomas would be at the bottom of the river. But I owe you my sister's life, and I cannot bear the thought of you looking at me with hatred." Amelia exhaled a shaky breath as a tear slipped down her cheek. "His debt is cleared," Christian continued, "but he is banished from Chicago. I've prepaid for a lockdown rehabilitation facility in Arizona. He leaves today under escort." "Thank you," she whispered, leaning into his touch. "Don't thank me," Christian said, pulling her flush against his body, ignoring his bleeding arm. "Your debt is paid. You are free. You can go back to your hospital and pretend none of this happened." Amelia looked into the obsidian eyes of the Mafia boss. She thought of the sterile hospital halls, then the blood-stained estate of the man who had dismantled an empire for his family. She had stepped into the dark and found she belonged there. She reached up, tangling her fingers in his collar. "I'm not going anywhere, Christian. I work for you now." Christian let out a triumphant groan, crushing his mouth against hers in a kiss tasting of gunpowder, survival, and an unbreakable bond. Amelia traded the fluorescent lights of the hospital for the gilded cage of Chicago's underworld. She didn't fix Christian, and he didn't soften for her. Instead, they forged a terrifying partnership built on blood, trust, and undeniable passion. The waitress who refused to tremble became the only woman the Mafia boss trusted with his life, proving that sometimes the most dangerous move in a rigged game is standing your ground.